Something vintage coming up on So Darn Fun. Keep watching to see what it is. Today's project is the recovering of an antique parasol. You can see the sterling silver handle. It is marked sterling. I don't know if you can see, if the camera will focus. There are initials on the end there. Very, very exquisite. The mechanism seems good, so I don't know if the mechanism might have been replaced at the time that this was put on, because I'm sure that's not original. We plan to cover the umbrella with this beautiful lace. It will be lined with silk charmeuse on the bottom side, and there will be a lace trim that hangs off the edge here. I'm excited about this. I've never done a recovery before on a parasol. My process will be to dissect the sections here. There's 7 triangular shapes. I will take at least one off to create a template pattern, and we'll just go from there and see where it takes us. If you have information on antique parasols like this, please let me know in the comments below, because I'd sure love to pass on information to my client, because it seems like neither of us knows a whole lot about the time period in which this particular parasol might have been used. The handle does measure about 7.5 inches long, because I know that in some time periods the handles were shorter and some were longer. I think Victorian era they were longer, Edwardian they were shorter. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I could be. But anyway, I'm excited to get started on this, and I hope that you'll enjoy this video. Here's the inside of the parasol, and I'm looking and seeing how all these pieces are put together. And one thing I want to note is that on each of these tips here, they have a little button, and I don't know if those buttons are functional or just for looks, but there are buttons my client provided me, so I will put them on. But as I take it apart, I'm going to just see if this little thread here is gone directly through the button on the back, or if the button is just put on later just for looks. I don't know. I'll find that out when I take it apart. So I'm just going to start plucking this apart. See what we find out. I have the first one off here, and looks like that button might be sewn on separately, just as a decoration. Nope, 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 nope. It looks like that button is functional in some way. Okay, the button is sewn on with all the other, and that is a thick thread. That is a very, very sturdy, thick thread. Yep. The button is just a little plastic button. That's another reason I'm thinking this might be 50s or later. And I don't think there's no more threads up the length of this little leg here. I think I've seen in some umbrellas there's other little thread tacks that kind of hold it in place. We'll see. I might put some in with the new covering. I don't know. Okay, I will be back when this whole thing is plucked off. One thing I want to point out is that one of these little points has this symbol on it right here. It says crucible, and it looks like a little elephant or something. I don't know if that helps to date the frame of this parasol at all, but that's another maybe identifying mark on this. Here it is all plucked off of that frame. And just a note, it does not lie flat when it's off the frame. I didn't really think about whether it would or not, but it's just something I noted. So now I'm going to pluck apart all these squares. I'm going to have to also pluck out this hem. One thing that I want to point out, because it kind of bothered me, was it's got a hem and it's turned down, and then they've made little tucks here. But I'm wondering if I could actually angle this hem so that that doesn't have to happen, so that it would lie smooth on the bottom. We'll see. Something I'm just thinking about. There. Here's what that piece looks like after it's been pressed. I notice it bows out just a little bit on the sides here, and then the bottom is just ever so slightly curved. So I need to have both halves exactly the same, and being that this might be just a little bit warped from being stretched on that umbrella, or maybe not being cut accurately to begin with, my bet is just being warped on the umbrella, or on the parasol. Forgive me if I say umbrella, it is a parasol. I'll fold it in half. See, this edge here looks like it was, I don't know, something happened to it, chopped away or ripped, or they didn't have enough there. So I'm going to follow the longer part. Better to have too much than not enough, because we can always trim off, etc. So that's going to be what my pattern piece in half is going to look like. And now I just need some pattern paper. So here's my pattern paper, and the easiest thing for me is going to be to just pin this on this folded edge. So in case I didn't explain it, which I didn't, this is folded in half. The pattern paper is folded in half. Here's the fold with both the pattern paper and my umbrella piece. Parasol piece. That way both halves of this pattern piece will be exactly the same. So what I am doing is just pinning the fold. And like I said before, if any of the fabric sides are a little bit bigger, I'm just going to go with whichever half is a little bit bigger. We see up here at the top, the underside sticks out a little bit. So I'm going to go with the bigger piece there. We'll see how that works. Now let's go ahead and just pin the rest of it here. I don't think I'll trace it. Since I have it pinned down, I'll just cut it out. Remember how I said that I didn't like the way that they had taken a tuck? I don't know if I can mimic this here, but they had taken a little tuck on the underside edge like that, and I wanted to try to eliminate that. So let's try this. It was 1.5 inches seam hem depth. Just going to pin that there at 1.5 inches. And to eliminate that bulk on the underneath of the seam, I'm going to fold that back right along this edge right here. And then it was also folded under like 1/4 inch along the inside. Well, let's do it like this, quarter inch, then this way. And we'll see what kind of there's a crease right here. If I cut that off right there, then it gives me a shape like this. And this is what should happen. When this is folded under, on the underside of the umbrella, here I go again, parasol, underside of the parasol. Here, it's going to be hard for me to show you. Here's this, like 1/4 of an inch here, and then turn under again here. That should give a nicer underneath hem. I think that's going to work better. So let's do that. Here you can see I've traced the pieces onto the silk charmeuse. I wanted to make sure that I had enough charmeuse to get all the pieces. I needed 7, and I actually have 6, and then a 7th one I'm going to piece together. You can see I've got part 1 and part 2, and I will French seam those together. So the rotary cutter came in really handy for the silk charmeuse. I'm glad that I had it to cut that out. Was still a little squirrely, but a lot better, I think, than using some scissors. So for the lace, I've got quite a bit of yardage. I have plenty, and it is going to be easy to cut. I'm just going to lay the pattern down on maybe 2 layers, maybe more, and just easily get that cut out. And then I'll have my stack of 7 lace and 7 silk. Here are my finished piles. I've got my silk underlining. I have my lace top portion. And here I have pinned together 1 layer of silk and 1 layer of lace. There's 6, 6, and then 1 of each here. So that's a total of 7 triangles. This one I've got pinned together. I'm going to baste this in a 1/4 inch seam. The original parasol cover that I dissected had 1/2 inch seam allowances. So if I sew this in a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to hold the layers together, then it won't show in the final product. I will repeat that process with all of these. So there will be 1 layer of this, 1 layer of this. So then when I'm finished, I'll have a total of 7 completed pieces that are ready to sew to each other so I can make the parasol cover. Here are all the pieces already layered with the underlining and the lace on top, and I've got them spread out in the order that they'll be sewn together in. You notice a big gap up here because these 2 will be sewn together, which will create a more umbrella shape for the parasol. It doesn't open out completely flat, it makes more of a curve. So what I'm going to do now is I will pin these together, preparing to sew these in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. In my original piece that I took apart, the seam is sewn and then it's pressed open and actually pressed back and then again top stitched. I will demonstrate that so you can see what I mean, but right now I'm going to pin them. I've pressed the seam open. Just a little note, this was the piece that I had to piece together. That's why you see that seam there. So I've pressed it open, and remember that funny little shape at the bottom that I talked about, how I thought it would help take away that little pleat that was on the original. That was like about right there when it was hemmed around the edge of that parasol cover. It seems like it's going to be working. So the original shape was just kind of funky looking, like that. So when it's going to get hemmed, it folds up really nicely like that. Turn under like a 1/4 and then like that. That's going to work nicely, I think. But for right now, what I'm going to concentrate on, I'm not going to fold that up right now. I've got this pressed open. I need to make little teeny tiny hems on each of these little seam allowances like that. So I'm just gonna randomly pick a place and I'm gonna just start curling it under with my hands and then pressing it. Some of that lace wants to stick out, like little pokies want to stick out. So when I actually sew that down, I'm probably going to have to take something like my seam ripper, just because there's a point on my seam ripper, and kind of push those little pokey ends under. See, there's half of it. Now the other half of this. Just neatens it up, makes it nice and tidy on the inside. I don't need to show you this whole thing, but this is what I'll do to every single seam on this parasol. I'll show you when it's done. Armed with my seam ripper, I'm going to stitch those seam lines down. Seam rippers aren't always just only for ripping seams, but sometimes I use mine to poke some of these ends under. Lace is pretty finicky sometimes because it's so open weaved that it's bumpy and little things can stick out. So that's okay. The good thing is that this is on the underside, and any inconsistencies really are not going to show. Here's the back side of what we just did. Stitched down nicely, and I'll show you the front side. That looks nice. Can't really see the stitching. So I'm going to do this to all the panels. Before I sew up this last seam, I just wanted to show you how beautiful this looks while it lies flat. Once I get this seam sewn up, it won't be lying flat anymore. Here it is, all sewn together. Now what I need to work on is the hem edges here. With the funny shape that I had at the edge, this is going to fold under about 1/4 inch, and this about 1 inch. And then I'm just going to top stitch it all the way around. So first I will press it, and then we'll go from there. Now that I have the cover all sewn together, I've safety pinned it at each point to one of these ribs on the parasol frame. You can see there's a little loop in the metal right there, and the safety pin goes through. There's 7 of them. So let's see how that's going to work. Now this is loose up here because we don't have the top finished. So we'll try to hold that down there while we open it up and hope that it works. Ooh, so far so good. Wow, look at that. Front side. Ooh, that looks good. Oh, I like it. I'll worry about this in a little bit, but what I want to concentrate on right now is the edge, because my client wants lace to hang off the edge here. Like that. And then these little points, they will just find a place to stick through the lace. That's the plan. This is what it looks like with the lace on. It's going to look really good. I'm really pleased with the way that that turned out. So what I'm going to focus on right now is this part right here. I've got it draped over the frame, and this hole is big, and what we want to do is gather it and stop it from going down this part. So I'm just going to fold it under a little bit and run some basting stitches around, and then going to pull it tight and gather it around there. Then it's going to be covered with a gathered circle of this to kind of finish off the top so that it looks pretty. So I ended up sewing this on by machine just around the perimeter. Otherwise, if I only tacked it in these spots, the rest would kind of pulled up. So I made sure that it was tacked all the way down, and it makes a nice cap to that. I have pinned on with these massive pins, the tips of these through that little metal loop that's at the end there. So now all I've got to do is hand tack those on with a button on top. Remember the original one, or at least the recover of the original, had little buttons right there. So I will put these little buttons on each point and sew it on by hand with a strong thread. Almost done. I've deflated the umbrella so that it will be easier for me to sew the umbrella cover, the parasol cover, onto these little tips here. I've done one and it worked well, so let me try to show you this next one. I'm gonna find the very tip of that seam right there, and I'm just gonna run my knotted thread. I've got a double length of thread, and I'm gonna find a place right on one side of that seam. I'm gonna go up, and then I'm gonna go down on the other side of that seam, just to kind of get this going and making sure the knot's not gonna pull through and make it a little more secure. That's gonna do well. Now I'm gonna pass. Okay, so turn the umbrella so you can see. How many times am I gonna say umbrella? Parasol. So you can see the end of this little tine or whatever it is. There's a hole right there. That's for the thread to go through. So I'm going to take my needle, I'm gonna go through this. I'm gonna pull it kind of tight, but not as tight as it needs to be at the end, because I'll tighten everything up at the end. I'm gonna go up from the first place that I went up. And this is where I'm gonna fasten the button on. Make sure the threads don't get twisted on the bottom. They want to wrap around and catch on everything. Okay, so here's my button. Little shell button. Cute. There's two holes there, so I'm going to go up one hole, down the other hole, And then I'm going to go down in that place where I had put my needle down the first time. There we go. Back through the hole on the parasol frame. This will be my last time through this. Up again. Do the first place I went up, and then also through the button. And if we can do this in one step, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll just bring it up on the top side of the parasol cover and then through the button. But it looks like I'm able to do it through the hole, which is great. Down the hole again and through the fabric. Let's get a better placement on that. Scoot the needle over to closer to where my hole was the first time. Okay. Okay, I've gone through the button twice. I've gone through the frame twice. I'm just going to work on tightening those threads. This is a buttonhole. I think it's a buttonhole thread. It's pretty thick. A buttonhole or upholstery thread that you can find at just any sewing shop. And I've got it through my needle twice. It really seems to have a lot of strength. So I think it'll be just what we need. Tie my knot here. Nice and tight. There we go. Okay, a few more to go. Now that I've got the parasol cover attached, there's one more thing that I have left to do, and I'll show you the whole parasol at the very end here. But there's one little nicety that was on the original cover that I took off, and it was this thing right here. And I think it just sort of covers anything in this area, just provides a little bit nicer attachment right here. So I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to replicate it with a couple layers of this beautiful silk. So let's start off by, let's give it about, doesn't have to be perfect because it's something that's just on the inside. Here's what it looks like all tacked in. That looks pretty good.
I've noticed that the ribs of the Parasol framework don't automatically want to line up exactly with the seams that are made in the cover. So I've decided to go ahead and join it with some stitches to the fabric. The connection of this part of the Parasol frame is just hinged. They don't slide up and down each other, so putting stitches right there won't interfere with the mechanism in any way, shape, or form. So I'm starting off with a double thread, very thick thread. I'm not tying a knot in the end. I'm leaving the end loose, and I'm just going to stitch through all the layers here. I'm going to go to the outside and take a stitch across that seam. With all the lace on the outside, it won't even show. So we'll take a couple stitches like that. We'll go around a couple times. And then the final time through, we're just going to tie the strands together in a square knot.
Are you ready to see the finished product? Here we go. All done. I'm really, really happy with the results. Let's open it up so you can see it in its entirety. Isn't that just beautiful? I love the way it turned out. I'm very, very happy with the results. There's the inside, if you can see it. So much more appropriate than this other stuff. This just looks so much nicer. I am really surprised at how easy it was. It was a lot easier than I expected. The hardest part for me was actually the hand sewing of this little round portion in there. With all the framework open, it's really hard to kind of get in there and get the needle in and out. So it took a little bit of Parasol acrobatics to be able to do it. But it was definitely doable. Definitely didn't take as long as it could have. So if you have a parasol or something similar, an umbrella that maybe you need to recover, especially if you have an old cover on there that you can take apart like I did to make yourself a pattern, then go for it. I hope you find my video helpful to you today, and I want to thank you for joining me on So Darn Fun. I'll see you next time.